Okay. So I put together this primer on cancer advocacy just to kind of give people an overview of what's out there. And, you know, I do want to acknowledge that so many of you have been doing this for so long that there is no new information here for you. And so what I would love to do is just kind of present it and then start the dialogue about what did I miss or what do you see in this space. Again, if you've known me, if you've ever seen me present before, I start with this picture. This picture was taken on the 5th of May in 2013. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer on the 17th of January 2013. I took a leave of absence from my job in California. I started to fly back and forth between here and San Antonio, Texas, where she lives, to get her through cancer. And I had no idea at the time what that meant. What it meant for me and what it meant for her was a bunch of words that we really weren't that familiar with. I mean, yes, we knew cancer, but, you know, invasive ductal carcinoma was a new thing. Axillary lymph node was a new thing. There was this whole new language that we had to learn. And I was really feeling, you know, quite strong and quite capable in the caregiver role. I found breast cancer social media. They helped answer a lot of my questions. And so I really felt like a very strong advocate for my mother. 6 weeks after that first picture was taken, this was me. In 2 weeks after that picture was taken, I went in, I had my very first mammogram, ostensibly as a baseline mammogram, and I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I went from having kind of a caregiver knowledge of cancer to a, oh shit, I'm the patient perspective of cancer. Immediately, and I know that so many of you have felt this, there was a vast abyss. There was a huge disconnect in how healthcare saw me and how I saw myself. And it was unnerving, because how could you treat me if you were just looking at me as a set of symptoms, me as a diagnosis? So that was emotionally challenging for me. And I found that navigating healthcare, navigating my own healthcare, was really another form of advocacy. And for me, it was self-advocacy. How do I take what was offered, which was a standard of care, and how do I use my outside voice to say, that's not going to work for me. I think I need a new plan, and I want to co-create it with my care team. I did fire my first oncologist. I did get a new oncologist. She was a partner. It was wonderful, but there were still a ton of unanswered questions, and really, from my perspective, pretty lame excuses. And again, don't ever get me wrong. When a physician, an expert, has the wherewithal to say, I don't know the answer to that, I'm grateful. I respect that. But I was hearing really dumb stuff like, well, our process doesn't really allow for that, or that's not listed as a side effect in the literature. And that was frustrating. And again, I know that you guys have probably heard most of these and know how frustrating that is. But the one that really got to me, the one that just, I think, helped me decide what I needed to do with my life, was the statement that there's just not enough data to answer that question. And the real reason that got to me is because in those 4 months of being a caregiver before I was a patient, I learned that there were over 16 million people in the US alone that had a cancer diagnosis or a history of cancer. We called them survivors. And in that time, I also knew that 1.6 million people a year in the US alone were being diagnosed with cancer. I was like, what do you mean you don't have enough data? Okay, 17 million people globally were being diagnosed with cancer. And again, not enough data. From everything that I was learning and everything that I was experiencing, I knew fundamentally that there needed to be a paradigm shift in healthcare. And I also knew that there were efforts to try to shift the paradigm in healthcare, in cancer specifically. But I was also one person, and one person can help Just like one vote matters, but one person by themselves can't do a lot to shift a paradigm. But what I could do is I could share my perspective. I could share my perspective with the hope of changing hearts and minds, with the hope of proposing a new way to do things. So really my path to advocacy, and this is especially for people who are just trying to figure it out, like what does it mean? What does it mean for me? What does it entail? My path to advocacy started with sharing my story. The story that I pretty much just told you. It started with my mom, then it was me, then it was oh shit, and we went from there. In sharing my story, I started to build relationships with other people with a diagnosis, with other caregivers, with clinicians, with community members. And then I started to realize, wow, my story is incredibly unique, and so is the person next to me. So truly, my first couple of years in this space was helping other people, and I used to say, find their outside voice. And sometimes that outside voice was within the confines of their clinic visit, just so that they could get their own needs met. And sometimes it was helping others share their stories more broadly. All of that in an effort to really change hearts and minds. One of the things, and some of you have been with me since the start and have been my mentors, but one of the big disconnects in me getting into advocacy was the dissonance between the early stage breast cancer community and the metastatic breast cancer community. And so it was very painful to kind of hear other people's stories and feel like they were on separate sides of the fence. And so really it started to be about how do we bring these people together? How do we find the similarities to really change hearts and minds and perspectives? It was about identifying gaps and proposing solutions. And again, for those of you who've been in this space, you know, anybody can point out a gap. Anybody can point out a broken system. That's not advocacy, that's complaining, truly. But when you identify a gap and you propose a solution, you are advocating for the new thing. You're advocating for the innovation. You're advocating for the need. And so I think that was really eye-opening for me to look at this as, hey, I'm not just complaining, I'm actually helping to make something better and meet more people's needs. It's about learning the language of healthcare. Again, many of you know this, we are the translators for our community. We learn the language of healthcare, and then we help other people learn that language of healthcare. We learn the language of research, and we help translate that language of research so that it is accessible to people who actually need to hear it. Ensuring everyone is represented with a seat at the table. And I said earlier, I can share my story. My story is so different from somebody down the street. It's one thing to have, you know, breast cancer at 40 and have insurance coverage and have the ability to fire your oncologist and get a new one. It's another thing to be, you know, a 26-year-old woman where English is your second language, and oh, by the way, you don't have health insurance. So we really need to bring all of these voices up and to the table. For me, it was about not accepting the status quo, or that statement, well, we've always done it this way. Just because we've always done it that way does not mean it's the right way to do it. And then seeking durable change. So if I change one thing for me, that's great for me, but it's not going to help the next person that's diagnosed. My cat is a little sad that I'm not paying attention to him. So these are the flavors of advocacy as I see them. And again, I really hope to open this up for a discussion around what you guys see. But there's the self-advocacy, there's patient advocacy, community advocacy, research advocacy, and policy advocacy. So self-advocacy is kind of self-explanatory. I mean, this is about you. This is about getting the right care and the right support at the right time for you. So this can be during your diagnosis, this can be during your treatment, this can be after treatment, this can be end of life care, this can be all of the things, but this is about you finding your voice, and sometimes even a person who can help amplify your voice to make sure that you get what you need. And then patient advocacy, we use this as a kind of a catch-all, I think, for a lot of things. And I think it does encompass a lot of things, but patient advocacy can be a one-on-one support, right? Are you working as a patient advocate to help somebody navigate a system? You were a patient advocate. Are you sharing your stories and experiences in order to change hearts and minds and perspectives? I think that's patient advocacy. Are you taking your rightful place and grabbing a seat at the table to help structure the way that healthcare is delivered and designed, or impact the patient experience? And are you paving the way and making room for others so that their experiences can also be improved and different? So patient advocacy to me is really around kind of that others piece, and generally improving the patient experience and the patient access to healthcare. Community advocacy is super exciting, and Sanford, has been part of our group since the beginning, and he's talked a lot about community advocacy. In my mind, community advocacy is amazing because in some cases we can keep people from ever getting into the cancer space, right? When we start to elevate community health and disease literacy, when we start to destigmatize screenings or talking about things like it's Colon Cancer Awareness Month, let's talk about your poop. People don't seek care for things that nobody talks about because there's this stigma around it. So can we go out and advocate in the community for screening? Can we go out and advocate for HPV vaccines that may prevent somebody from developing cervical cancer? I mean, truly prevent as opposed to just reduce their risk. That's community advocacy for me. But it's important to remember too that community encompasses a lot of things, right? You can have a faith-based community, you can have a cultural community, you can have a disease community. So when you think about community advocacy, it really starts from how are you defining community in that moment? And many of us, most of us, all of us are members of multiple communities. Research advocacy, and I know I have the high-powered research advocates on this call, so I'm hoping to hear more from you guys too around the what you do and the where you do it. But this is really about being able to promote and facilitate focused research. So in the breast cancer community specifically, I know that Ginny's on the call. She said that's great. We have a lot of research into invasive ductal carcinoma, which is the most common type of breast cancer. But what about inflammatory breast cancer? Because it's different. I know that if you guys know Kimberly Richardson, she's talked about ovarian cancer, and there's a common type of ovarian cancer, and then there's a different type of ovarian cancer, and there's a disparity in the research. Disparity too. There's research in white people. That is where our clinical trials are mostly filled and formed with white people. We need to have diversity in how we recruit for those trials, how we design those trials, and how we're doing research with different racial groups and different cultural groups. It can also promote relevant research. And if I have to read one more research study where big money's been spent on how yoga can be beneficial, I might lose it because we get it. It's great. It's complementary. It's wonderful. I support it. But really what we need to do is we need to figure out research kind of pre that point, or how can we do something that we don't have an answer to. So it needs to be relevant in your community. And Jill's on the call. I mean, when you talk about lung cancer, there's all kinds of different research that can happen with lung cancer, but EGFR and the EGFR resistors have really driven relevant research into a specific biomarker of lung cancer. Policy advocacy is a whole different space. So policy advocacy is really around the policies and the access and the protections, and a lot of it involves government, which some people never want to touch. But the reality is, if we change it at a health institution or at a community level, that's great. It's not durable change for everybody. Those protections or that great thing that you've set up at your health institution is not necessarily going to benefit everybody. So policy is really what cements it. Cat not happy. So my advocacy pieces together, I started with really caregiver patient advocacy, but then moved from self-advocacy into patient advocacy. Research advocacy was super exciting to me, and I got involved with a couple of different groups. Policy advocacy took a little bit longer. Policy advocacy was, National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship is still kind of my go-to with policy advocacy. So I worked through all of those things, but I didn't do them in any sort of nice, smooth format. It was like self-advocacy when I'm in the middle of a crisis, patient advocacy. Oh, then I have the time and energy to do all these types of advocacy, and then oh crap, I've got another health issue. I'm right back focused on self-advocacy. So it becomes kind of this mishmash, or it did for me. But I think the important question to ask yourself as a new advocate, and even as an older advocate that's trying to figure out where you want to invest your time, because our time is pretty precious, is what's your why? This is my favorite slide ever, and it makes me cry because not everybody on this slide is still alive. But this is my why. These are people, just some of the people who have impacted my life, and I get energy, and there's so much that I get from this advocacy community that it becomes this virtuous circle to want to give back to it. But it is important to have goals, not just to hug and love on the people that you love and respect the most. So these are some of my goals. I don't need to read through them as much as to show you that there is a reality, and then there's where I want to help move the needle. But the most important thing is that it is not, especially for you newer advocates, this is not a smooth linear path. And it involves all of the types of advocacy, or at least it has for me. So again, whether you have been doing this for a while, whether you're thinking about doing this, whether you're a brand new advocate watching this like 10 days later, the road of advocacy is really paved with a common desire to educate and to learn, and to drive innovation and make changes in a system, a desire to personalize the experience, an urge to even the playing field. So it's very, very challenging when, again, people talk about the way things are. The way things are for one group of people is not the way things are for other groups of people. And so we really need to talk about equity. We need to talk about health equity, and that involves a lot of things outside of cancer, but all play into cancer. It's also important to know that there are all kinds of roadblocks. So we still have the data and the knowledge silos. And for as many amazing clinicians and researchers that we have kind of co-creating and collaborating with us, there is a ton of paternalism and ego that remains in the system. And you can't erase it. You just need to know that it's there. You need to know how to deal with it. And you need to know how to work around it. You have a lot of status quo challenges. So healthcare moves in some ways at a glacial pace. And Stacey led a fantastic tweet chat last night. And, we were talking about all of this amazingness in telemedicine and telehealth and moving forward. And, the irony is that this is still a system that relies on the fax machine. So again, knowing that there are going to be frustrating things and roadblocks. Financial constraints. I don't know about any of you, but I have not found a way to make a ton of money doing this. I like to cover my costs. So sometimes that is a challenge. And I think the biggest thing to know, and I don't think that there's anybody on this call that doesn't know this, but there is grief and there is loss, and there is an emotional burden that comes with this. And I'm not great about this, but some of you might be. Figuring out how to put that into your bubble and deal with it is really important. So finally, find your people. They may not be who you think they are. And I will say that again, when I started in this space, the dissonance between the early stage breast cancer community and the metastatic breast cancer community was so alarming and upsetting and off-putting to me that I leaned into the lung cancer community. Because at the time, and I know that there's dissonance there as well, at the time it seemed like the lung cancer community was hell-bent on changing the narrative. They were hell-bent on reducing stigma and removing stigma and getting access to screening. And that's where I was. I was hell bent. And then my people became even bigger, right? My people became much broader. It wasn't defined by cancer type. It was more defined by who really wants to get shit done. Listen to identify the gaps and the challenges. Again, you have a personal experience, and that is amazing, and it's relevant, and it's critical, and it's important. Your experience is not everybody's experience. So figure out collectively where the gaps are, where the challenges are, so we can all work together to make changes. Identify your strengths and interests. So we all have a lot of strengths, but again, this can be taxing work. So what do you want to do? Where do you want to put your energy? Because I know you can do amazing things probably anywhere, but what's going to feed you? Words matter. Just because they resonate with you doesn't mean they work for everyone. And the example that comes top of mind for me is survivor. There are many people who are living with cancer that will always live with cancer until they die, and the word survivor doesn't resonate with them. But the word survivor doesn't resonate with a lot of early stage cancer patients either. And some of them want to be called thrivers or warriors or whatever. So just be aware of that. Everyone can be an advocate, truly. I believe this, but advocacy is not for everyone. And for as much as people sometimes need permission to say, hey, can I be an advocate? I want to give everybody permission to say, you know what, it's important, but it's not for me. And that's okay. Self-care is critical. And if anybody knows how to do that really well, I am taking notes, because I think that is probably the biggest challenge that I have in this space. And then your voice is important. All of your voices are critically important. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to try to make my thing go away so I can see you guys. Everybody still there?
We are here.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just say, Stacey, that, you know, the moment I met you on this forum, I was impressed. But this was so lovely, so wonderful, so thoughtful. You covered everything.
No, that's not the goal. We're not supposed to cover everything. We're supposed to have a dialogue now.
You're amazing. This was just a beautiful presentation, and just so very well done. I'm just really I'm more impressed than I was before, and I don't know how I could even be more impressed. So thank you.
I agree, Stacey. That really was well done, and it was presented in a way that kind of breaks down the different types of advocacy, but also shows that everybody's path, everybody's journey, if you will. I know that's a tough word, but advocacy journey starts out that way. So I think that's important too for new advocates who think, you know, those of us who have advocated forever, that our path has been direct and we just got there because of us. And that is so not true. All of us have gone through every emotion, hit every roadblock. And I like the way you illustrated that so perfectly. And I think, that's a really great presentation. It'd be great for new advocates to watch. And, you know, one thing that I always say to new advocates too, when they're looking at what their why is and what they want to do, because a lot of times people go into it thinking, well, I need to help, I need to make a difference, and not realizing it's kind of a two-way street. So you need to also find something that energizes you, not depletes you. And so if you can look at, you know, self-reflect on that, then you know where you want to work and you know where you don't. But that was fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you. I did not expect to get an ego boost, but I appreciate the love. And
Will you share the slides?
yeah, oh yeah, I will.
I would also like to say that the cat really added to the presentation, and I may be borrowing that particular cat. I've seen a lot of cats on Zoom,
He's playing
but that
foosball right
cat in
now.
particular added to the presentation for
But
sure.
maybe he's playing foosball right now.
I see him. I
That is
see
the-
he's like a little rebel.
Oh, he's needy. He's needy.
Jill, I like what you just said. You said something. Oh, and I wish I had written it down.
Well, you
I
think
like
of it. I think Candace had started to
Yes.
say something.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just saying, I said it was an awesome presentation, and it touched on the need for the patient voice to be in various locations, because what's missing is the leadership of patients. So, because, you know, when you look at all of the entities that you've posted, they're all institutional. And so they run based upon institutional processes and structural processes. So they're missing the necessity of fitting in where the patient needs are. And so that's why it's important that we communicate the challenges that we're experiencing so that they can help adjust their institutional and structural processes. It assists them in really understanding what the patient journey really is like, because they don't know, and they won't know unless we tell them. And it's important to not only just be within the medical institution, but like you put in NIH, you know, where the funding happens, okay? Because then we can help guide them and say, listen, you keep sending money over here, but you know, for this research, but you're not doing enough research for this. And one of the things that I'm an advocate for that they're not doing enough research is survivorship care and long-term survivorship care. Because our issues don't start like right after we finish treatment. They actually start years afterwards, and we start finding out that, wait a minute, when I used to be able to lift my arm over my head this way, but now I can't do it that way, you know. And so it's not something that happens immediately. And then you realize that, wait a minute, I haven't done anything in years. Why is this happening? But there's not enough research in long-term survivorship care. So everything that you've put out was spot on, and it was necessary. And it's something that I think that if more organizations realize the power of the patient voice and realize that they can learn more from patients instead of just you have great research, but did you talk to a patient? Have you listened to what patients are saying about what's happening? And then challenge that. You know, I'm all about pushing the envelope. I'm like, I'm going to check. I know you have the PhD in what you do, but I have the PhD in survivorship. So we can work together with this, or you can have me come back to you and challenge you every time you say it.
Yep. One of the things, and Candace, one of the things you reminded me of that I forgot to say was the language is really important. And while we talked about words matter and our abilities and role as translators, like into our own community, it's also the language of persuasion, right? And so when we talk to institutions, like, of course, we know it's the right thing to do to make this patient experience better. But sometimes we have to use the language of healthcare, which is, oh, your patient satisfaction numbers will go up. And oh, by the way, we need to, you know, we need to learn that language too. And unfortunately, it's a huge burden.
I think we also have to respect them as they respect us. And I say that to advocates all the time. They get very angry about things. And, you know, it's kind of like we have to respect their work. And if you don't know what their work is and what it entails, then you can't get upset about something you don't know anything about. So my mom used to always say that, you know, if you're upset about something and you don't learn why it's that way, and you have no right to complain, you know, type thing, and action, you know, you've got to be able to provide solutions. You drive me crazy, but it's so true. And so, you know, it's asking the questions. I think one of the biggest problems that I found asking a question is that a lot of places we know, I won't even go there, but a lot of different organizations or systems don't know how to involve us.
Mhm.
So that is what some of the reason we're not involved. And it's been really interesting in terms of when that's pointed out. We've definitely gotten, I've definitely gotten a lot of phone calls asking if I or another advocate could help participate or help give feedback. And so I think we need to keep that in mind as well, is we can't just say, you need to include us. Our voice is important. Our input will, make your research and its results more relevant. How do they do it? And that's, I think, what we need to, kind of give them those tools as well.
And I agree with you on that. I just would give pushback on, you need to add the patient voice, and here's how. And, and one of the things what's missing is patient advisory boards, and asking, if you don't have a patient advisory board, can we start a patient advisory board? And then here's how, and then have that patient advisory board connect to all the other departments. And that's how you bring along the patient voice.
And I wanted to add in what you were saying, Candace. I was listening to a talk last night, and I hadn't heard this saying before, but it was like, the way you make sure you have a seat at the table is to set the table yourself. And so I think maybe it tips into, for some, activism, but I also think there's a place for saying there can be like patient leadership, patient-led, survivor-led, whatever the terminology is, that just goes outside the medical model. It's like, I'm not doing it that way. And there's patient expertise, and it's, for some people, it's integrated in working within systems, but for some people, it's like the system's not working. And so I think it's both and. So I love this presentation. I love everything in it. It's really compelling. It really draws me in. And that's the only thing I would add, is there's also advocacy that isn't always collaborative with systems. And I don't think that's, so you can say, all right, I'm just going to start an organization that doesn't yet exist because I see this need, and I don't like the way it's constantly being framed. I'm going to frame the whole conversation different. So I think that's the only other thing I would add.
I think, Sissy, you bring up a great point, and we're not always able to work within institutions, but I think that's actually really critical, because cancer care doesn't just happen within institutions, right? And I think institutions are, they're burdened. A lot of them are burdened with, financial constraints, time constraints, all of these constraints, right? And my tactic, especially with the local, Candace brought up, patient advisory council, I sit on one, I'm loud. When they try to form things like survivorship things, I'm like, stop, because there are 75 gazillion different organizations that are doing that. And what you need to do, because they're already integrated in the community. So, you're going to make this program and then you're going to wait 6 years before you translate it into Spanish. Guess what? They're already doing that. They're doing that in South San Jose. And what you need to do is help your patients access something that already exists. And so I think there's this balance we have to find with our health institutions to say, hey, this is how you create something, and then saying, hey, this is not your lane. And I don't mean that like, hey, get out of it. I mean, you don't even need to worry about this. We got this. It's there. You need to know about it, and you need to advocate for it, and you need to help your patients access it.
So Stacey, this is so interesting, because because Candace just brought up the whole idea of these community advisory boards. So I've been on a couple of these things too. And the one that I'm on right now is the hospital is going after their NCI designate, or the NCCN designation, right? In order to get that NCCN designation, they have to, part of that process now is having these community advisory things. I don't understand, or involvement with the community. And I think that we're on to something here. Absolutely. that now it's almost like they're driving the bus. They're like, okay, come on, you guys are going to be on the advisory board, but we're only going to do these things because these are the things that we want. It makes sense to us. It's a very interesting, like I've had these aha moments, like, what are we doing? We're not even following the mission here. We're just kind of like meeting to meet so you can get your designation, and then we're
Check the
gonna,
box.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, what you and Candace both just said about this is that, you know, we need to be driving the bus. And I love
I'm a control freak. I love to drive the bus.
I'm ready to put you on the road and have you go out and speak, right?
I'm going to grad school. I don't have time for anything else.
Yeah. I can just picture this bus too. We'll get you something good.
No, I am not going on a bus by myself. The whole point of this presentation is to bring everybody together.
I
Well, I
think
do have
another
a
thing is
Get a bus.
Do what, Candace?
I said, I do have a CDL. I used to be a bus driver for the city here in Chicago, so I do have a
Oh.
CDL location.
Now we just need a bus.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have a visual now
Yeah, the
too,
driver.
Candace.
So I wanted to say one thing too about what these conversations are fabulous, and I always they get me so excited about things. What I've tried to do is find the areas where there are no experts on a team, and that those to me are the areas where the advocates can really step in. So I have these things like, I don't know if you know what BHAGs are, big, hairy, audacious goals. And I keep, as I listen to different presentations and things, I write things down, and then I think about them and I start talking about them and trying to learn more about them. And I think that this is an opportunity for advocates to really collaborate and become the voice for things that have to happen. So I'll really quickly talk, but we can talk about this later too. But the things are like following the Asco policy on removing financial burden from clinical trials. That's talked about all the time. It's a wonderful policy, but nobody ever brings it up. But we can. Fair and square, get representative participation and enough participants to be able to analyze key cohorts. And we can fight for that when we're doing reviews, when we're on concept development, when we're on patient advocacy councils, and we can just be that voice that they're always going to hear us say the same thing. But together, we can make that even stronger. PROs, getting those incorporated into research. Sufficient studies before subjecting humans to clinical trials. Joshua Kimmelman was talking about that, how once a drug's approved, then they just start doing all these additional trials without really doing the research up front. It's just like, will it work for this patient group? Will it work for this patient group? That we push back. And then monitoring like phase 4 real world data, things like that, to make sure that trials are really followed up once something's approved, emergency approval. Are they doing the diligence, which apparently a lot of times they're not. And so I think that there are a lot of areas that really come in, and now with equity, diversity, that we can all work together to do engagement in communities. And there's nobody on the teams that has a clue how to do that. And they just a lot of times there's an opening for someone to step up and say, I'll help with that. And all of a sudden, an advocate gets a role that's not just on an advisory committee. So those are the things I've been seeing as the opportunity for advocates. And people, like the group of people here, I think really can make a difference in making these gaps filled and making research better.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ava. I think too, this is just an observation. I think some of us think big, like really big, like let's change clinical trials in the way, which is important, great, and absolutely needs to happen. Especially for newer advocates, I never want to have them shy away from making small incremental changes, because what feels like a small incremental change in the vastness of healthcare and research can actually make a huge difference in the lives of humans. And so it's kind of a pick your pleasure, and it goes back to like, what are you really good at? Like, or what do you want to be good at? And then what do you have the energy for? And, you know, the people, and Roberta's not here, and this is probably the only meeting she's ever missed, but Roberta's amazing. She is there. She is feet on the street. She's eyes on that person in front of her and making these changes. And that's not to be underestimated, or so I never want people to feel like, oh shit, I got to sit on an NIH panel for me to be an advocate. That's not true. And truly, if you are somebody who has had an experience, a life-changing experience, and this is well beyond cancer, right? And you want to share it, and I say want to because it's not, you guys all know this, you guys have all shared your stories. It's making yourself vulnerable, and it's going back to a time when you were really vulnerable, and so it's not insignificant. And so I want people to feel like if they have the comfort and the desire and even need help in shaping that story and the trajectory of that story, sharing that story in and of itself is absolutely advocacy. And you can stop there if you want to, or it's kind of like crack. Once you start, then you just kind of want to change other stuff. I don't know. I've never actually been on crack. Sorry.
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. You know what? And for anyone that's, because you can take your advocacy to the next level, right? And by starting your own nonprofit. And I will tell you, I started mine 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago in July. And I kind of went into it backwards because I was so fed up with reading statistics and the other nonprofit organizations within the colorectal cancer space not being in the community the way they should. And when you see statistics that say that a certain community has the highest rate of this, and this, why aren't you focusing? Why aren't you targeting? And every time I asked, I kept being told that they needed funding. Okay. And I'm like, so here you have millions of dollars, and you're saying that you can't take out a portion, just a small portion, to do community engagement, and they're like, well, yeah, well, we have volunteers here and there. That's not community engagement. And community engagement means you're understanding the community. You know what their barriers, are, what their access is, about the community. And I got so frustrated. And so that's why I started the foundation. Now, 5 years plus later, they had no interest in minority outreach. Okay. It was always, I'll say it starts at this level. Now that Chadwick Boseman has passed away, now everyone is doing health equity and minority outreach and Black programming. And it's pissing me off because I'm like, all you have to do is say, because they're larger organizations, all they have to do is say that they're doing minority outreach and they get funding like that. But me as the minority organization in this space,
who's been doing it,
who's been doing it is like, hello. Have you seen our website? So just know that when you go into something like this, going into nonprofits, if you decide that you want to start an organization, know that your challenge will be coming up against larger organizations that have larger budgets. But this is not to deter you. What I'm trying to say is, while they're going for the big fish, they're missing the smaller things. And the smaller things are like connecting with the universities and the hospitals that are looking to connect with organizations that are doing boots on the ground work. And that is where you can sustain yourself and your organization and get the credibility that a lot of these organizations are saying they have. You actually get to create that partnership, the credibility, and be part of grants without even having to do the process yourself.
Yep. No, that's such a good point, Candace. And on the slide where I talk a little bit about community advocacy, it would be awesome if every advocacy group that was focused around a cancer or a disease said, oh, wow, these are all of the different communities and different types of people I need to support. The reality is it doesn't happen that way. And so in many respects, if you have the energy to be an advocate and you are in a community that is underrepresented, then you're actually what they need, right? You're the this, and yeah, they've got funding and they've got great marketing and they've got, all the whatevers, But I love the idea of people that are already in the community becoming community advocates and then starting to link in with all the other pieces. Because again, you are uniquely positioned, right? You are already boots on the ground. You already have trust. We are all trust brokers, right? For our own community. And now if you said, and I know you probably already do, but if you said, now I want to really drive research advocacy, you've already got the people, right? You've already got the people, and these researchers are like, well, we don't know how to recruit Black people into our studies. This thing called trust, you have it. You have it. And so now the onus is on the research community to say, hey, can I prove myself to Candace? Can I prove myself to the trust broker of the community? And if I do, and if I am worthy of that trust, now all of those things start to fit together, and it really starts to move much more quickly.
Absolutely. And you can also become that person that trains the researchers, which is something that I've been doing for the last year, is now training researchers how to do community engagement and how to gain trust in communities of color. And one of the things I push it, about that is them learning medical history so that they understand why communities of color are pushing back against research. And if you don't know that, and it didn't start with Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee, that's my biggest thing. Stop talking about Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee. Go to 1619. If you go there, you will understand why. Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks, I always say that's the PG version of it all. But if you go back to 1619, and I always recommend the book, Medical Apartheid. If you read that book, Medical Apartheid, it will break your heart. If it doesn't make you feel anything, then check your pulse. It is, and I'm speaking from what happened with African Americans. If you read more on what has happened to the Latinx community and what has happened to the indigenous community, it's all, oh my gosh. So when you come across communities of color, they're not resistant because they don't have anything else to do. It's like anything else. You know how you have generational curses and generational beliefs? These are stories that have been passed down in addition to things that have been documented. So it's not like, okay, we just woke up today and said, I don't want to take this shot because I don't trust it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can be your trusted advisor to that medical community based upon your own personal experience.
Yep. So Candace, I'm not putting you on the spot here, but I kind of am. There's two things that you've mentioned that I would love for you to present to this community as you have time and interest. And one is really the standing up of the nonprofit, because I think there's a lot of people who think that, and it's not an easy task. And that's one of the reasons why this collaborative is not a nonprofit, because I'm not willing to take that on.
Yes.
But then there's also this idea, and it happens. I think I would love to hear your approach at educating researchers, because it's not just educating researchers about a community. Sometimes it's educating researchers about the side effects. Sometimes it's and that path to educating researchers, I think, is something that would benefit the whole group. So,
oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I will be on the panel at Asco talking about the side effects of cancer survivorship. Yes.
Awesome. I will send you an email and we'll find a time.
Yes, let's do that. Let's do it, because March is Colon Cancer Awareness Month, so I'm kind of like, shoo.
Yeah,
which is something I've been trying to get other survivors to do. It's like, listen, your story is amazing. I guarantee you it's amazing. My story has been out since 2006, and it took root and ground somewhere, and somebody found it somewhere in 2007, and it's been hitting ever since. And that's the thing, is preparing survivors to tell their stories, and tell their stories where they're compelling, because sometimes we can give too much information that's not pertinent to what's going on. And so if we can train patients and survivors to tell their stories, and then tell their stories and train them how to do media, because that makes a big difference on how you're viewed. Because sometimes your story is not picked up. It's not interesting. It's just nobody taught you how to tell your story that it's compelling.
Yeah.
And that's usually what's missing. Now you get all these organizations like, oh, we want to share your story. But does anyone help you does anyone help you have your bio sketch, so that if researchers are looking for you, you have a bio sketch? Are they helping you do a bio so that you can have a media kit? So if anyone is looking for a survivor, you have a headshot. and you have a media kit that you can send out. That's something that when organizations are asking you to tell your story, they're not doing that. And I think they should. They're telling your story and they're making money off your story. They should actually help you be able to tell your story on other platforms as well and prepare you for the next level of advocacy.
Okay, that sounds like another topic too.
Yes, let's talk about that.
A+ for Candace, I'm just saying. No.
Candace, I have to say that that's so important to have a guide, and someone who I know in my story and how it was released to the public. I am so grateful for a woman who was in public relations that was on a call when an interviewer was interviewing me and told me what I could put up with and what I couldn't, because it can be very raw and very, I felt like this interviewer was like, this news reporter was ripping my heart out, and I ended up calling her back and saying, I'm sorry, you can't run the story, because I had someone there, and it was so important to me. So I think this could be a whole really important presentation and a really important something to get out to people, because there's a lot of people who think cancer stories are about, getting that emotion, which it is. It has to be, like you said, compelling. But sometimes the way reporters can go about it, if they're not the pros, I mean, people who are really good do lovely, but this is a really important thing, because it can really hurt people to have their story told in a very public way that's not how they want their story told.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it's traumatizing. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm a stickler for that. Read your story before they put it out, and then make your changes without fear. But I'm also a proponent for making sure that whatever emotion you want to display, it's okay to have that raw emotion, because something happened to you and they need to feel that something happened to you. But at the same time, the beauty of it is you're still here and you're sharing that story. So it's like the hills and valley approach. I've been to the valley and now I'm rolling up the hill. And so I'm going to take you to that valley, because I went through the valley, and now I'm going to bring you up out of it because I'm coming out of it. And here's the beauty of my story. So your story can have a very wide range. It's not just sad because you're still here, right? So that's how you want your story portrayed. You always want the ending to be, some type of, I'm still here. I mean, I'm not saying that words, but there is a celebration at the end of your story.
And sometimes a story, I mean, anybody's story, I think this is a really important conversation, because your story doesn't change fundamentally, but the way you tell it can push a different call to action.
Yes.
Right. If your goal is to get people to participate in research, then there's one way to tell your story. If your goal is to get people to get a colonoscopy or a mammogram, that's a different way to tell it. If your goal is to drive survivorship support, same damn story, but the way you tell it drives a different call to action. And that's a really good point. And I just looked at the time, and I'm so sorry for going stupid over.
Well, that's what happens when you have good conversations, and unfortunately I hate that I miss a lot of them because it's always conflicting with something else that I'm doing, but I'm like, whenever I can, I try to jump on it. I try to follow up with everything. So I really, really enjoy, this group. And I think it's great, and it's awesome information. And it's really helpful for current advocates and advocates that are looking to do more. So
well,
thank you
guys.
Such a great
job. Thank you. And Candace, I will reach out